grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. It's time for the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Welcome back to part 2 of the Week 5 preview of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. Me and Paul here. We are going to start with the Vikings at the world champion Philadelphia Eagles. What do you got, man?
I almost want to start by saying stop using the world champs. I'm happy we did it, but this team is relying on it too much, and I think the fans are giving them too much of a pass. So
okay, all right.
This is a new season. Let's just call them the Eagles, and let's win another one. How about it?
All right.
Vikings coming to town this week with a lot to prove. If you look back to, again, last year's NFC Championship game, we made somewhat of an embarrassment of them. So they got a lot to prove this week. Vikings, I like going into this week. Vikings receivers, I like Thielen, like Diggs. Eagles are giving up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. And for this whole matchup, I'm going to tell you what the teams were giving up last year because these were two of the best defenses of the league last year, and looking at them this year, it's insane. So once again, Eagles are giving up the 6th most fantasy points to receivers this year. Last year, they were giving up the 14th most. So like the Vikings receivers this week. I also I'm going to watch Kirk Cousins this week. 7 games versus the Eagles. He's thrown for 16 touchdowns, only 5 interceptions.
16 touchdowns in 7 career games?
Exactly. He's averaging over 300 yards a game passing, so Kirk is going to put up some points. I'm not going to tell you whether he wins or loses those games, but he's going to score points fantasy-wise, and it doesn't matter for you as a fantasy player if he wins or loses against the Eagles this week.
Yes.
Eagles this year giving up the 11th most points to QBs. Last year, they were giving up the 23rd most points. So
their defense is definitely not playing like it was last year.
Upside-down year for the Eagles defense. The secondary has been suspect of late. Eagles that I'm watching the Eagles receivers. Alshon Jeffrey came back last week. Looked really strong. I look for Nelson Aguilar to rebound. He had a couple drops. And Jordan Matthews, who's back with the Eagles as their slot receiver, had an immediate fit with Carson Wentz. Their chemistry that they had from Carson Wentz's rookie year is obviously still there. So Jordan Matthews has a role. He scored a touchdown last week. The Vikings this year are giving up the 8th most fantasy points to wide receivers. If you look at last year, they were giving up the 25th most to wide receivers. So this is a very upside-down matchup. Looking at these two defenses, not much has changed except the production on the field. Carson Wentz is another Eagle that I'm watching. He's getting better each game. So if you drafted him, if you kept him from last year, good on you. He's playing like he can be the MVP of this league. The Vikings are letting up the 7th most fantasy points to QBs this year. Last year, again, they were letting up the 28th most fantasy points. So very upside-down type game.
Last year in the bottom 5, this year in the top 7.
Amazing. It's amazing. Players I'm avoiding, Minnesota running backs. We talked about them on the first part of this podcast. Dalvin Cook, Latavius Murray, they've shown you nothing this year. Eagles are the 2nd best team at shutting down opposing running backs in fantasy. So I don't expect much out of the Minnesota running backs. Eagles took a lot of heat last week for not running the ball enough. So if you have Jay Ajayi, he could be a interesting start. The Minnesota defense is pretty good, but they did give up a lot of ground, a lot of yards per carry last week to Todd Gurley. So if the Eagles focus on the run, you could see some value with a Jay Ajayi. I'm really shocked again about these defenses. I think the Vikings have something to prove, but I think the Eagles and how well they've played at home will continue to excel. This is the game of the week for a reason on Fox. I think the Eagles will wake up and continue to expose the problems that the Vikings seem to have with their defense. And this time they'll do it with their starting quarterback, not their backup, Nick Foles.
There you go. So I have some some interesting stuff about Alshon Jeffrey. So obviously playing the Vikings, you're going up against one of the best corners in the league, if not the best, in Xavier Rhodes. We'll see if he sticks to one side, if he shadows Alshon or not. That's kind of a point of contention over in Minnesota. Xavier's been on record saying, I don't like to move around, not because he doesn't think he can, but he thinks the defense plays better when he's staying to one side. But you know, his defensive-minded head coach does not see it the same way. He likes to, keep them on the number one receiver for the opposing team. So we'll see how they operate because, this is one of those offenses that has a clear-cut number one receiver, and it's definitely Alshon Jeffrey, and especially with him being back healthy. But if you look at Alshon Jeffrey's schedule for the rest of the season, I don't know if you've looked at it at all, but it is terrifying for a wide receiver.
Oh, boy.
So he's got Minnesota this week, as we said, Xavier Rhodes. Then next week, he's going to get the New York Football Giants, so he's going to be playing against
Janoris Jenkins.
Yeah, the Jackrabbit. Next week, he's got the Panthers, they're not an easy matchup for wide receivers at all. They don't have Josh Norman anymore, but they're still very good against the pass. Then the week after that, he gets Jacksonville, so it doesn't matter which side he's on the field. He's going to face a top 5, top 6 corner in the league with A.J. Boye and Jalen Ramsey on the same team. Then the week after that, he's got to bye Dallas the next week with Awuzie, and then Marshawn Lattimore the week following when he plays the Saints, and then he gets Janoris Jenkins again when he plays the Giants for the second time. So that is up until week 13. Probably one of the most terrifying schedules for a wide receiver, especially a guy coming off of an injury, starting the season on the PUP list. So if I'm an Alshon Jeffrey owner, I am very scared, and I think he is the ultimate buy or sell high guy after seeing him come back in his first game of the season and score a touchdown and obviously show that he's gonna be that number one receiver for the Eagles. So in my opinion, if you have him, you should try and sell him. But that is some juicy stuff for you Alshon Jeffrey owners out there. We are going to move on to we go from your favorite team to my favorite team. The Broncos go to MetLife Stadium to play the Jets. Last week against those Jaguars cornerbacks that I just mentioned, the New York Jet wide receivers did absolutely nothing. Quincy had a decent game, I guess. Quincy Nunwa caught 4 of his 8 targets for 66 yards, but I think a lot of it was kind of in garbage time when the Jags had the game locked down. Anderson showed again that I just don't see Anderson and Darnold as a good fit together because it doesn't seem like, I don't know if it's either Darnold being hesitant to throw the ball deep or it's just in their game plan to not do that. But that's what Anderson's game is that deep ball. And if they're not going to throw him the ball in those deep patterns, I don't see how he can be successful. Yeah, he got the 6 targets, but caught 2 of them for 18 yards. It's not going to be good enough. Terrell Pryor didn't catch his only target. So these receivers did absolutely nothing, as a lot of us thought they would. The running backs didn't do much else either. They had a combined, 53 yards between the two of them on 12 carries and 8 targets. That's pathetic. So last week was kind of a wash for the Jets. Looking at the matchup this week, it doesn't really get much better, really. If anything, it gets better maybe for the running backs. But for the receivers, the Broncos are giving up the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers this season. So I think this is another week to kind of stay away from those Jet wide receivers. I don't know why anybody would roster any of them except for Quincy Nunwa anyway. But if you're in one of those deeper leagues, definitely stay away from those guys. And this running back split between the two of them, I don't know what to make of it. Every week it flip-flops between who's getting the carries and who's getting the targets. It's just very inconsistent. So I don't know if you can really feel very comfortable playing either one of them just because of the vulturing going on between the two. And the Broncos aren't the worst matchup of the week, but I'm staying away from them if I have them. We look at the Broncos side. Kind of mentioned it earlier with the Demaryius Thomas and Cortland Sutton thing. Sutton's definitely getting those red zone targets that used to go to Demaryius Thomas. I traded Demaryius Thomas in one of my leagues. I would sit him if I still had him. Sanders, to me, is the only receiver worth playing on that team until Cortland Sutton can show that he can do more than hope to catch a fade route in the corner of the end zone. This last week, this was the first time I really sat down and watched a Broncos game. And, dude, Phillip Lindsay is a freaking bowling ball rocket combo.
Runs really angry.
He really does, man. Holy crap. And for an undrafted guy, looks like a scat back but does not run like one. He is a power back for sure. He's, again, led the team in attempts. He got the rushing touchdown. Devontae Freeman got the receiving touchdown on what was a weird play. It just seemed like when he got like a couple of yards away from the end zone, the defense just stopped making any effort. It was really weird looking, but a touchdown's a touchdown. Who cares how he gets them? Case Keenum against this Jets defense. The Jets are giving up the 10th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks. They got a decent defensive line. They got a pair of safeties that I think in a couple of years we're going to be looking at as by far the best safety duo in the league. So I'm staying away from the pass game for the Broncos. Is there anybody on the Broncos in the pass game that you're looking to play? Paul, you got any confidence in any of these guys?
No one that I can say that I'm looking to play. I'm keeping a very close eye on Courtland Sutton. He was someone I drafted late in my fantasy drafts this year as a potential sleeper. He didn't come on heavy enough in the beginning of the year for me to keep him, so I ended up dropping him. But he's someone that I started to notice is getting a lot more attention. He's getting picked up in a few more leagues. I think the Denver Broncos are making a concerted effort to start trying to get him the ball more. Mm-hmm. Last week, he was only one target behind Demaryius Thomas for the team lead, which was 7 targets. So I think Courtland Sutton is the future in Denver. The question is just how quickly he becomes a fantasy relevant future wide receiver in Denver.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he's most likely going to be seeing single coverage this entire year because you can't, that's 3 very quality wide receivers. Yeah, maybe we're low on Demaryius in the fantasy world, but he's still a very good wide receiver. And you cannot leave him or Sanders, to me, single covered. You have to spend the attention on those two. So it should open things up for Sutton. So hopefully, maybe we can see him kind of emerge in a couple of weeks as a solid number 2 play in fantasy world. Maybe not in regular football, but
yeah, absolutely.
Let's go to a NFC North matchup. Packers going to the Lions. Aaron Rodgers going over to the stadium that he just loves throwing Hail Marys.
Yeah, we'll see if it comes down to another Hail Mary. I can't say I would expect it to, but you never know what's going to happen in these divisional games.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why I try and stay away from divisional games in survivor or suicide pools. I definitely don't like to touch divisional games like this one because they're such a coin flip. Packers that I'm interested in this week, Aaron Rodgers, 3-13 all time against the Lions, 34 touchdown passes.
3-13?
3-13. So that's a pretty good record when it comes to playing the Detroit Lions. I'm sure one of those years was the year that they went perfectly defeated and 0-16. So
yeah, it's true. So 2 of those wins.
That was 2 easy wins there.
Wow.
But he has 34 career touchdown passes against the Detroit Lions. So obviously, as we mentioned, he likes throwing touchdowns there. Detroit, though, is only giving up the 25th most points to the quarterback this year. I still think the familiarity Aaron Rodgers has with them warrants starting him if he is on your team. I might list him as more of a QB2 this week. So unless you have a better option on your bench, I'm still rolling with Aaron Rodgers this week. Other Green Bay players that I like, the Green Bay running backs. If you have either of them, they might be worth a start. Lions are letting up the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs this week. Aaron Jones is probably the one that you would rather own at this point. He had 11 carries last week in the blowout win against the Bills.
Yeah, I have the both of them in a full point PPR league, and I'm starting Aaron Jones this week just because that's the league I went 0 RB on, and I definitely have awesome pass catchers, but my running backs are a little suspect. So I'm really hoping Aaron Jones can kind of emerge as a solid RB play week to week because I'm really counting on it. I kind of put all my eggs in one basket there in the RB situation.
Yeah, we'll see. Maybe this is the week that he really makes a statement. 11 carries last week is a lot when you look at the Packers and how they run the ball, but you have to keep Aaron Rodgers healthy this year, so I expect the running game for Green Bay to only take more of an importance as they try and keep Rodgers on both of his legs instead of just the one leg that he seems to be standing on right now. So if you have any Bears that are on a bye this week, if Jordan Howard's on a bye for you, Aaron Jones might be worth the start if he's on your bench. Lions that I'm looking out for this week, Kerryon Johnson. His first run last week was for 32 yards. He only got the ball 8 times after that. I think that's a big mistake by offensive coordinator Jim Bob Cooter. The Cooter man. So he needs to get Kerryon Johnson the ball more. Packers were not good against the run last year. They have some injuries up front on the defensive line. So I expect Kerryon to be more part of the offense because the way you end up beating the Packers is by keeping Aaron Rodgers off the field. So if they want to do that, they're going to control time of possession by running the ball, utilizing their running game with Kerryon Johnson.
They definitely got to get him more than 9 carries.
Insane. He ran for...
Disappointing.
He was your first 100-yard running back, and then you followed it up with 9 carries.
Yeah,
so.
in a game that they were in, too.
Yep.
I understand if you have to get away from the run game, but...
They were leading that game until the very end. So
give the kid the ball.
We'll see if the Lions wake up offensively when it comes to play calling and just game style. Matt Stafford is another Lion that I'm interested in this week. They're going to have to score points if it does turn into an Aaron Rodgers show up there in Detroit. He is only Fantasy Pros' 11th best quarterback option this week. So if you have guys that you could put above Matt Stafford, it might be worth doing. But I think this is going to turn into a game that some points have to be scored. And given the lack of confidence in the running game last week, Matt Stafford is going to be the one that's moving the ball to score those points. Players that I'm avoiding this week, Devontae Adams. We talked earlier in the first episode about how banged up the other Packer wide receivers were in Randall Cobb and Geronimo Allison. So this week, Devontae Adams is potentially one of the lead options to go along with Jimmy Graham. He's likely going to draw Darius Slay in coverage, who most of you should know is one of the top corners in the league. And in 7 games versus the Detroit Lions, he only has 4 touchdown passes, which is pretty good, but he's only pulling down 31 yards a game across those 7 games. So if you're going for such a boom or bust fantasy option and you need Devontae Adams to catch a touchdown, he might not be your best option going into this week, and it might be worth looking to one of your bench guys to step up here.
Yeah, it's a tough one because I'm sure everybody that drafted him, he was either a first or second round pick. So a lot of people are probably really counting on him, and those are the receivers to that really it really sucks to have to sit those guys. But we saw last year with when AJ Green went up against Ramsey, and obviously AJ Green was probably everybody's number 1 wide receiver that owned him, and that was a week that you should have sat him, and it's a good thing if people did sit him that week, because I think I remember him having, 3 fantasy points or something?
Not a lot. So,
But yeah, I mean, if you saw Aaron Rodgers' post-game press conference, he was not happy. He looked really frustrated. He was making comments about getting Adams and Jimmy Graham more involved. So I look for them to maybe increase the target share for those 2 guys, and obviously if their other 2 wide receivers are out, it's those 2 and nothing. So they're definitely going to have to rely on the run game more. So even more reason to start Aaron Jones if you have him. And that stat with Aaron Rodgers against the Lions is fascinating, man. I assume that he's just been in so many shootouts with Matthew Stafford, and because Aaron Rodgers' defense has always been so bad, he's probably just always gotten the crap end of the stick there. But okay, so let's go to another really interesting game here, an AFC North game, the Ravens versus the Browns.
Ravens have looked good.
They really have. It's just this whole run game thing that's still super frustrating. Alex Collins again with another fumble, just killing me, man. I have him way too many leagues. He's one of the guys that I'm trying to trade off in one of my leagues, just because I'm terrified of these fumbles really affecting his his playing time there and his snap count and all that. So looking at the run shares there last week, Collins had 11 attempts while Buck Allen had 10. And in the fourth quarter, when the Ravens were trying to put the game away, it was Buck Allen that was getting those carries in the fourth quarter, which
that's what happened if you put the ball on the ground.
If you're not getting carries at the goal line, you're not getting carries in the fourth quarter when your team is up, it's really hard to justify you as a starting running back. And it just seems like every week there's just a little chunk taken out of Alex Collins' value. He had the touchdown last week, so he kind of salvaged his scoring there. But I think the most interesting guy on the Ravens is John Brown. Is he going to keep this going with all these touchdowns and these 100-plus yard games? It's pretty ridiculous.
He seems to be one of Flacco's favorite targets and has blended in nicely into that Ravens offense. If you look at all the teams across the league, I think you have to look at the Ravens when it comes to most improved wide receiving core with Crabtree, Willie Snead, John Brown. I mean, and they all just clicked with Flacco instantly. I think it's working out pretty well for the Ravens so far.
And they're about to get some even more help in the pass game with rookie Hayden Hurst expected to make his debut in Week 5. If you look at the 3 tight ends that the Ravens have been playing, it's a bunch of no-name guys. Yeah, they've been playing well, but it's nobody to write home about. And they're averaging 10 targets a game to the tight end position. So will Hayden Hurst come in and get maybe 7 or 8 of those? I think he could. Will he be able to put up the same production that those guys have? Yes, I think he can. And Joe Flacco has proved in his career he loves the tight end position. He's going to target the tight end position. I talked about Hayden Hurst before the season started as one of the rookies that I'm most excited about. So hopefully we see him make his debut and be productive because he's definitely an exciting guy. And one of the more I'm waiting for him to make his return so I can change one of my fantasy teams' names to Hayden Hurst Helmsley for all you WWF fans out there. You know what I'm talking about. So looking at the Browns team, Baker last week, he looked like a rookie. He had the 2 interceptions, lost 2 fumbles. Hopefully the fumbling thing is something that they can get fixed. He's definitely running around like a maniac, and he's not protecting the ball. He's not in college anymore, so he's got to put the ball into the elbow or the armpit there and secure that ball. But
Browns scored 42 points last week. Can we all just take a moment and let that soak in, that the Browns scored 42 points? And, I mean, even looking back at that game, it was a pretty controversial call that, I mean, I don't know if it completely lost them the game, but Derek Carr's,
it did, bro.
He's in the pocket, gets sacked. They took a touchdown off the board.
Exactly.
I don't know why those defensive players, this just brings me to like a larger point of,
let's do it.
Whenever they either get those might be interceptions or potential fumbles that they pick up and they start running down the field with, and then they just stop. They stop at like the 16-yard line. Just go all the way. Just go put it in the end zone so that we know that's where you ended up with it. And then who knows, maybe that does get challenged, and guess what? The ball's in the end zone for a touchdown rather than giving you the ball at the 16-yard line.
But is that I don't know if you can challenge that play. If it's a dead ball.
The one last week you couldn't.
Okay, right. So, yeah, they need to do something about that because they need to let the play out and then let the refs look back at the play and see if he was actually down. Because to call a play dead in which most likely that defensive player was going to score a touchdown. It's kind of like baseball. You can't count on a double play, with errors and whatnot. But you got to let these plays play out. And I think that's something that they really need to look at going into next season. The NFL has showed they love changing plays around. They've been screwing the defense every year for the past, seems like every year since I've been watching football when I was 8 years old, watching Wayne Corbett getting lit up. And now you're seeing, you breathe on a quarterback and you're getting, who was it? I think it was Baker that got, he got hugged and they called a foul. It's like, it's just gotten so ridiculous, man. And they got to do something for the defense. And if it's something stupid, like just, letting one of these plays play out and going to review afterwards instead of, having the ref call it dead just because he thinks he saw something. That play last week, I think the Browns fans have some serious gripe with the NFL that should not have been stopped. I think it would have been a touchdown. It would have changed that game completely.
The most points the Browns scored all of last year was not anywhere close to 42 points for those that are shocked by that fact. Just a quick look. It looks like 28 points for the most points the Browns scored all of last year. They didn't score their 42nd point of the season until week 3, and they just hung 42 points in one game against the Raiders. So, Browns fans, I think you have a lot to be excited about.
For sure, man.
Hopefully the league does a better job of not stealing games from you.
Yeah, we got to do something to help you guys out. The run game was huge for the Browns last week. Carlos Hyde, on his 22 attempts, turned him into 82 yards and a touchdown. He's continuing. He's got a touchdown in every game this season. I don't know if that's going to keep going, but like we were saying earlier with the DFS wide receiver number 2 guys, keep riding that hot hand until they show that they're no longer hot. I think the 2 touchdowns by Nick Chubb were kind of, can't count on that, right? I had 100 total yards, over 100 total yards on 3 carries. That's not going to happen every week. But then you look at Jarvis Landry, led the team in targets again, as he will every week. But kind of disappointing game for him. If he didn't catch that touchdown, I think there'd be a lot more Jarvis Landry fans kind of upset. 4 catches on 10 targets for only 34 yards, but like I said, he did have that touchdown. The guy on this Browns pass game that's kind of a puzzle is Antonio Callaway. Last week, 9 targets, caught 3 of them for 54 yards, but the week before that, he had 11 targets. I don't know what to make of him. Like he's not converting this big target share that he's getting into any serious yardage, and I don't know if I think there was a quote from head coach Hugh Jackson saying that they were going to give him less targets.
They were potentially going to scale him down because he hasn't either picked up the playbook fast enough or he's not taking enough, not making enough of the opportunities that he's been giving. So he is someone that I picked up that I actually moved on from this week, given some of that talk, given just letting Baker develop relationships with other receivers. I think we got really excited after Antonio Callaway had that big game against the Saints.
Right.
And then we saw some targets coming his way, but I don't know if there's really anything there yet.
And it really wasn't a big game. It was just that one huge,
play,
that deep bomb that he caught. So maybe he's just one of these deep threat guys that you can only really count on 3 or 4 catches a game, like he's been giving you. And if that is true, that they're going to start scaling him down and try and distribute those targets somewhere else, I think Higgins is the guy that's going to benefit the most from it. Last week he had only 5 targets, so 4 less than what Callaway had, yet he had 6 more yards. So, maybe we see another week of Callaway getting these heavy target shares. Maybe we don't. Maybe we see him going more towards Higgins. But maybe that's a situation you should keep your eyes on if you're looking to add a 4th or a 5th wide receiver that could have some extra value for you at the end of the season. The tight end situation there is interesting. Darren Fells was the guy that got the touchdown, but it was a 50-yard catch. You can't count on that. David Njoku was still obviously way more targeted than Fells. 7 targets for Njoku to 2 for Fells. Njoku turned him into 52 yards, pretty good, but we want to see him getting into the end zone. He's one of those tight ends that I think a lot of people were very excited about coming into the season. And I'm not going to say he's been a disappointment, but he definitely hasn't produced to what I think a lot of people were expecting him to. Let's move on to another NFC game here. We got the Giants going to the Panthers. An interesting game with the Panthers coming off a bye.
Yeah, that is definitely going to be an interesting game. Beautiful day down in Carolina. It'll be good for everyone that was affected by Hurricane Florence to get out, have something else to enjoy and focus on. So Giants I'm looking at this week, Saquon Barkley. The Panthers pretty much held Zeke in check in game 1 when they faced the Cowboys, but Zeke still did score a touchdown, got some fantasy points to make him relevant. Barkley gets the ball in so many ways, so I would expect a similar line to what Barkley put up in the Jags game,
right,
which was 128 all-purpose yards and a touchdown. So I'm not worried about Barkley going against Carolina. I'm still playing him, but don't expect the same kind of Saquon Barkley numbers that you've seen earlier this year. Rhett Ellison, we talked about him last week. Carolina has been letting up the 6th most fantasy points to tight ends this year. The thing that worries me is that Carolina just went out and signed Eric Reed to shore up their safety and their defensive backfield. So I could see Rhett Ellison really being a non-factor in this game because Eric Reed is now on the team. He's apparently picked up the playbook really fast.
You see him as kind of like a tight end eraser?
Yeah, I think so. Because, between Kuechly and the linebackers and now Eric Reed, I can't see what a tight end on the Giants is going to do
backup tight end.
a backup tight end at that. Exactly. So on the Panthers side of the ball, I'm actually really interested in the Panthers defense. If you're looking for defensive help this week, I myself am a little worried about the Jags defense just because of what Patty Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs have done. So I went out, I rostered a second defense just for this week, and I made that defense the Panthers defense. The Giants have not shown much this year other than Saquon Barkley. Odell is not seeing many targets. So the Panthers defense has only gotten stronger with Eric Reed added this last week, and they just are coming off a bye with a week of rest. So I think the Panthers defense, if you need defensive help, if you have the Bears potentially and you want to keep them on your roster, maybe go out, add the Panthers just for this week, get by with one less bench player and see what the Panthers can help you out with in week 5. Otherwise, Christian McCaffrey, Giants are letting up the 11th most points to fantasy running backs. If you watched the game at all last week when the Giants played the Saints, Kamara just made them look extremely silly with 3 total touchdowns. He was running mad against that Giants defense. So I expect Christian McCaffrey to potentially be used the same way. So I like McCaffrey. Obviously, I like Cam Newton. The offense starts and ends with Cam. Players I'm going to avoid this week, Eli Manning. I really thought he would come through last week
in
a potential shootout. He let us all down there. Eli is he's trash. He's
trash.
He's a year older. I understand that he has those 2 Super Bowls, but Eli is not the best thing about. He's not even he is the worst thing I would say right now about this Giants offense. Sure, they have a bad offensive line, but I think any other quarterback could do a little bit more because any other quarterback is going to move around in the pocket. So Eric Flowers letting guys in the backfield instantly and then tripping them, he doesn't really have to do that because another quarterback is going to move around a little bit and get the ball downfield to an Odell Beckham or out in the backfield to a Saquon Barkley. So Eli Manning, don't use him. Get him off your team. Don't even consider him. And then Panthers wide receivers, I'm also a little bit worried about. We talked earlier about good corner matchups. Janoris Jenkins is a great corner for the Giants. He handled Michael Thomas last week.
Which is very hard to do.
Hard to do. Michael Thomas set an NFL record this season with the most receptions through 4 weeks of the season. He only had 4 catches for 47 yards last week. So any of the Panthers receivers, Torrey Smith hasn't shown you anything. DJ Moore hasn't shown you anything. If you have Funchess, I think he's on your bench this week because Janoris Jenkins is going to lock him up like he did with Michael Thomas. So I think the Panthers, just looking at the game overall, are emerging as a popular suicide pool pick. Mm-hmm. So I expect the Panthers to handle their business this week at home.
Yeah, the situation for Odell, I'm waiting for. I don't know if it's going to be this week or next week, but I'm just waiting for that blow up from Odell. We kind of saw it a little bit last week, him screaming at the top of his lungs on the sidelines, but he wasn't screaming at anyone in particular, so it didn't really make the headlines. But
he's polite Odell now.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for it to happen, man, because it is. And I saw a really interesting stat that they haven't targeted Odell any. The longest they've targeted him so far this season is 18 yards down the field. I don't know if that has to do with the fact that their offensive line is so bad, like you said, and that because Eli can't move around and buy some more time for Odell to get down the field. But whatever's going on there, hopefully they can fix it this week for fantasy purposes. I know you as an Eagle fan are probably enjoying watching this offense struggle. But, for the fantasy owners out there with stock in the New York Giants, it's, probably one of the more frustrating offenses this year. There was so much, speculation as to how good this offense could be with this, star running back coming into the NFL, with Odell coming back, and with this tight end that's essentially a wide receiver, and Sterling Shepard being one of the better wide receiver 2s in the league, and they really haven't showed us anything at all this season. And I don't know, maybe that decision to go for a running back at number 2 really wasn't the best decision. But
this is an interesting question I was thinking about earlier today. If you're the Giants, would you sign a Nick Foles in the offseason next year?
I would.
I mean, Nick Foles is going to be a free agent. He's proven that he can do it in the big games. I mean, it hit me today as something that's an interesting consideration. Would the Giants move on from Eli next year.
I think the more important consideration would be on the side of Nick Foles is, do I want to go play behind a horrible offensive line? But I mean, if you're telling the guy, hey, you're getting one of the best running backs in the league, one of the best wide receivers in the league, and a tight end that, if he can stay healthy, can definitely be a top 5 tight end.
Those weapons are no joke.
Yeah,
so.
for real. So, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting situation. We'll have to keep an eye on it.
We will.
Let's go to the next game. We got the Dolphins going against the Bengals. Dolphins last week just laid an absolute egg. They walked out onto the field and just totally crapped their pants. The first 9 drives, it was 7 punts and 2 Tannehill turnovers, an interception and a fumble. Just absolutely atrocious. This is one of the reasons why I did not have Tannehill as a as a waiver wire quarterback last week. You know, he was coming off of those the big games that he had in the first couple of weeks. The last 2 games before last week, he was 17 for 23 in both of those games. Pretty good percentage, and had the 5 touchdowns to no interceptions in those 2 games, and then followed it up with an absolute stinker. Finished with 100 passing yards, gave you a total of 0 fantasy points. I'm not going to beat this Dolphins RB situation to a pulp, because we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier in the get your ass on the bench segment. But Kenyon Drake's not doing it. Frank Gore is just an absolute robot. He will never die. And you're looking at the wide receiver that was probably the most exciting wide receiver on this Dolphins team was Kenny Stills, and another one of these games where it's just 3 catches for 40 yards. I think that's kind of he's the definition of a touchdown or bust wide receiver, because he's never gonna get any more than at most maybe 7-8 targets a game. And, if he catches half of them, I don't see him ever really having any more than maybe 50, 60 yards unless he catches a big bomb. He's one of those deep threat guys that maybe has a little wider of a skill set than the most of the deep threat guys in the league. But, you look at Albert Wilson, 20 yards on 4 catches from 6 targets after 2 weeks of a touchdown every game. Jakeem Grant didn't really do anything either. He was another guy with 2 touchdowns the week before. This Dolphins offense really took a step back, and this is probably one of the better defenses to face after a horrible offensive showing last week. The Bengals are in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. So if there's such thing as a get-right game for this Dolphins passing game, it's definitely here against the Bengals in Cincinnati. This Bengals-Falcons game from last week, holy crap, huge game. Was by far the highest scoring game in fantasy points, at least last week. We saw Giovanni Bernard again go in and without Joe Mixon, gave you an awesome game. 15 carries, 70 yards, 2 touchdowns, another double-digit points for 3 weeks in a row. We'll see what that touch distribution looks like this week coming up if Mixon is healthy again. They're both listed as questionable right now, at least on ESPN. I don't know what the other sites have him as, but
Mixon looked pretty healthy last week when he was running down and tackling
AJ
Green after scoring the game-winning touchdown. So if Joe Mixon's not back this week, I think it's a clear sign he's almost ready to come back, and the Bengals are just being cautious with their young running back.
Yeah, and looking at this Bengals versus Falcons game from last week, and especially looking at the pass game for the Bengals in particular, really interesting target distribution there. AJ Green only had 8 to Tyler Boyd's 15, and then John Ross 2. Caught both of them 52 yards and a touchdown. AJ Green had the game-winning touchdown where Mixon joined him for the celebration in the end zone, as Paul just mentioned. But yeah, I mean, Boyd getting 15 targets, caught 11 of them, had 100 yards. Again, ride him until he shows that he's not this number 2 wide receiver that he seems to be. As we talked earlier, Tyler Eifert, that sucks for him, man. He's been dealing with injuries, I feel like, his entire career. if he can just stay healthy. It's him and Jordan Reed. If the two of them could have stayed healthy, we would be looking at a nice group of 5 solid starting tight ends that are worth those high round draft picks. But because these two guys have never been able to stay healthy, we've kind of been robbed from tight end talent in the past couple of years in the fantasy world. So with him out, obviously somebody's got to step up. And if you look at the situation that they have there, obviously Tyler Kroft did some things last year. Was a productive tight end for him in fantasy. I mean, if a guy that is a red zone target, a guy that you can look to and have a pretty good percentage or a pretty good a touchdown outlook there with Tyler Kroft. But you look at the targets this season so far. Tyler Kroft only has 5 targets on the season to CJ Uzomah's 8 targets. Uzomah's got the touchdown. Kroft does not. Uzomah's leading the tight ends there in snap counts as well. So I think if you are looking for a tight end and you want to get in on this Bengals offense while it's hot, I think Uzomah's the guy to go to there. And like we said, you're just going to have to pay attention if you're the Mixon owner. Stay tuned in for him. Is he going to play? Is he not? And this is, as we were talking earlier, man, if you can handcuff him, if you can go out and get Giovanni Bernard, because with Mixon out, Giovanni Bernard is going to produce for you. He's going to get those touches. So he is, to me, one of the best guys to handcuff.
This is an interesting matchup because, to me, it's almost a game of frauds or not frauds. Because you look at Miami coming out 3-0, and we're sitting here talking about how there's no one fantasy relevant on their roster. So how are they 3-0?
Right.
And then you look at Marvin Lewis, who to me has been, I don't know how this man hasn't been fired. He has more lives than a cat at this point to still be the Bengals head coach, but he's got them playing this type of football that looks like they're a playoff team.
Yeah.
So between Marvin Lewis and the Miami Dolphins, one of these two is a fraud. And to me right now, it doesn't look like the Bengals are that. So I think this might be the beginning of the end for the Miami Dolphins as it comes to the 2018 season.
Yeah, they had their chance to really step into the spotlight, I think, by putting their foot in the throat of the Patriots last week, and they did not do that in any way, shape, or form. I think this Bengals team is different, man. We've kind of, I'm not going to say the Bengals defense has been great over the past couple of years, but it hasn't been all that bad. And you're looking at it this year, they're in the top 10 in most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. Yet they're winning because their offense is just killing it with offensive coordinator Bill Lazor. They've really seemed like they're clicking. They've finally been able to find a wide receiver 2 to replace Mohamed Sanu and Marvin Jones, which they lost. They let those 2 guys walk away a couple years ago, and I think they've been able to replenish that wide receiver core for sure.
It's embarrassing to say, but Billy Lazor was a Chip Kelly guy.
Was he really?
He was. Chip Kelly brought him into the league as his offensive coordinator. Wow. He didn't last he might have made it through the first 2 seasons with the Eagles, and then we moved on and brought in Pat Shurmur instead of Billy Lazor because we didn't do much with Chip Kelly.
The Chip Kelly coaching tree.
Oh, my God.
Interesting one to look at.
Oh, man.
Let's go to the Battle of Texas down there with the Cowboys playing the Texans.
Giddy up.
Those Texans love their football, and
my God.
The home of this podcast is down there in Austin, Texas. So for all your Texas football fans down there, you got yourself an awesome one here.
Sunday night too. So boys, get ready. It's a giddy up for the Battle of Texas. Cowboys that I like, we talked about it earlier when we gave them a cheers. Zeke Elliott is the entire offense for the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, it's him or nothing.
He is eating. They're feeding him. So Zeke is happy. The Cowboys are winning games with feeding Zeke, so they're happy. It'll remain that way. So I am not doing anything with Zeke this week. Jeff Swame, however you pronounce his name, Swamai as the tight end. He did pretty well against the Lions last week. He was targeted 5 times, 3 catches, 39 yards, and a touchdown. It was a red zone play. So, again, this was a 1-yard play action touchdown pass to him. But that's what the Cowboys' offense excels at. Once they can establish the run with Zeke, it opens up everything else for Dak doing play action passes, and no better of a distance to throw a ball than 1 yard for a touchdown pass. So
a huge tight end, yeah.
if you need a tight end, he seems to be the only relevant tight end on the Cowboys, and has gotten involved the past couple weeks now with some tight ends. So the Texans are also letting up the 8th most points to tight ends. So Jeff could be your option for this week if you need some tight end help. Texans that I'm going to keep an eye on. We talked about him in the previous episode. Kiki Kute, he's emerging as a nice underneath slot option for Houston. He could get pressed into a much bigger role if Will Fuller has to miss some serious time, but last week he had 15 targets.
Another guy with a hamstring, man.
And for those speed guys, that's a big injury that's going to take some time to come back from. I mean, you look at Leonard Fournette and how long his hamstring has hampered him, and he's already ruled out for next week. So Kiki Kute could be a very interesting play if you need some receiver help, especially in a game that I think both teams are going to look to make a statement on national television. Obviously, Jerry Jones likes being the face of the league, referring to the Dallas Cowboys as America's team. So let's see if they can really put on a show between the Texans and the Cowboys on Sunday Night Football this week. Players that I'm a little worried about. I'm worried about Deshaun Watson. He has really suffered from his sophomore slump. Rusty coming back from an injury, just not seeming to feel comfortable back there in the pocket. And I think that has a lot to do with how many times he's been sacked. The Texans are allowing the second most sacks in the league with 17. Last week, Indy sacked Deshaun Watson 7 times, which is absurd. So Dallas, on the other hand, on their defensive side, they're number 3, only behind Chicago and Indianapolis because of that 7-sack game in sacks this season. So the Dallas defensive line knows how to get after the quarterback. The Texans have a very hard time in slowing it down.
7 sacks on such a mobile quarterback.
Exactly. Like how does that happen?
Yeah.
So I really think that the Texans are going to focus on improving that. I think it was not until a couple weeks into the season last year that you saw Deshaun Watson really take over a game and use his legs like he did against the Bengals on Thursday Night Football. So maybe this is a game under the big lights that Deshaun Watson says, you know what, I'm just going to trust my athleticism and let it speak for it, and not just worry about being that pocket passer or prototypical NFL quarterback, instead relying on the talents that he has.
Right.
I really think the Texans are going to try and clean up the problems that they had with sacks last week. So I think they're just going to outpace the Cowboys, frankly, here, who right now they're only relying on Zeke Elliott to move the ball and score points. So I look for the Texans to end up winning this game, but Zeke, Jeff Swam, Kiki Kute, and Deshaun Watson are some of the players that I'm interested in this week.
I don't know if there's a game on the slate this week where you have two offenses that play as completely different style of football as these two do. The Cowboys want to play as slow as possible and just, give the ball to Zeke and then give him give him the entire play clock to catch his breath and then give the ball to him again. And the Texans are not like that at all. They want to push the ball down the field. They want to go.
It's a run and gun versus a just pound the rock.
Yeah, this should be an awesome game. I love football, man, because these games, dude,
these are the games.
They only get to play each other every 4 years. It's like the Jets and the Giants, man. It doesn't matter who's good, who's bad. They're awesome games, and this Battle of Texas, I think it's going to be an interesting one for sure. It's going to be fun to watch. Let's go to two teams that probably won't be a very exciting game, but that's the Titans playing against the Buffalo Bills. The Bills turned back into pumpkins last week after upsetting the Vikings in Minnesota. They went and they played the Packers and laid an egg. McCoy, he's another guy that we should have had on the get your ass on the bench.
Oh, my God.
segment.
How do we miss him?
Oh, man. Because, honestly, I don't even know if he's worth keeping on your bench either. You might as well just cut him. He's on one of the worst offenses in the league. If that game against the Vikings never happened, it would be the worst offense in the league. And they just have no real threat in the passing game. So every defense is just stacking the box. He's not a powerful runner by any means, so he's relying on his quickness and whatnot, and he's dealing with these rib issues. So I just don't know how you can count on him at all. If you have him, sit him. The Titans are giving up the fourth fewest fantasy points to running backs, and probably the Bills' only other option is Charles Clay. And if you look at the Titans' defense, they're giving up the fourth fewest fantasy points to tight ends as well. So both of the top options in the Bills' offenses are really not that great of plays this week. So I would stay away from the Bills. I would cut every Bill on your team. I would not even bother looking at them on the waiver wire. They're trash. Get rid of them. They're not going to help your team.
Josh Allen has looked cool, but, I mean, if you're relying on him to do another Minnesota type of performance, you're hoping for too much out of your fantasy team. There are plenty of other quarterback options out there. Maybe if you're in a dynasty-type league and you need to have a guy on your roster the whole season to be able to keep him the following year, and you think Josh Allen might turn into a good player along the line, then sure, hold on to him, but I'm not starting him.
Yeah, until the Bills show that they're putting players around him that he can count on. I don't know how you can count on him, but yeah, in a dynasty league for sure. On the Titans side of the ball, we already went through Derrick Henry's woes from this season and from last week especially. Dion Lewis caught all 9 of his targets for 66 yards, thank God, because in the run game he gave you 0 yards on 4 attempts. That was pretty bad. And Corey Davis had another 15 targets. So, caught 9 of them, had the 160-plus yards, a touchdown. He's got 39 targets on the season so far. Unfortunately, though, if you're looking at him going, yeah, he had another one of these big target games. Week 1, he had the 13 targets. But he's probably going to get the Trey White treatment. He's going to be plastered to Tre'Davious White all game long, and I don't see him really doing anything. So if you're really looking for a contrarian play in daily fantasy, I think Tajay Sharp's not a bad play at all, because that Bills defense outside of Tre'Davious White really has not much to speak for. They're in the top 10 fantasy points allowed to running backs and tight ends. Yeah, I know Tajay Sharp's a wide receiver, but like I said, if you're looking for a contrarian play, he might be their only target coming this next week, him or Taywan Taylor. So, make your pick. Moving to one of the several revenge games that we have, that I think this one's one of the more juicy revenge games, is Adrian Peterson and the Washington Redskins going down to play in the Superdome against the Saints.
Yeah, Adrian Peterson, it's interesting. This one didn't even strike me as a revenge game at first, because I forgot how quickly his time in New Orleans came to an end. But then I think back to last season where I had Adrian Peterson on my team. I think I picked him up when the Saints did, and I played him week 1 because the Saints were going against the Minnesota Vikings, and I'm like, absolutely, the Saints are going to use Adrian Peterson in this game.
That's the revenge game, right?
To show the Vikings, like, why would you get rid of this guy? And I think Adrian Peterson had less than 10 touches and was barely used, and then after that, that's when it kind of blew up.
Is that the game where he...
the video on the sideline of him yelling at Sean Payton?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That stare down from hell?
Oh, yeah. He broke Sean Payton in half with his eyes. That's just the shell of Sean Payton walking around, because Adrian Peterson stole his soul with that stare down. But as I'm looking at this game, Redskins that I'm looking out for, I'm watching Alex Smith. We talked about last week that he should not be your number 1 quarterback option. But again, if you have guys on bye this week, if you've been rolling with Mitch Trubisky and you need some help, Alex Smith is facing a Saints defense that is allowing a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks. So he could be a pretty serviceable option on Monday Night Football.
Second most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season.
And then Chris Thompson. I'm expecting the Skins to be down in this game, and they're going to have to score points. Adrian Peterson is not their quick offense, pass-catching running back. Chris Thompson has filled that role, so I expect him to be out there a lot. And in typical Alex Smith fashion, Chris Thompson leads the team in targets.
Right.
So check down, Alex Smith has been utilizing his running back, Chris Thompson. I expect that to continue, and I expect it to be a large part of game flow because of what the Saints' offense has been. And it's been potent, and it only gets stronger this week. So Saints, I'm looking out for. Mark Ingram, the return of Mark Ingram. What does that mean? What does it mean for Alvin Kamara? I think that's probably the biggest thing Kamara owners should be looking out for. I do expect Ingram to be utilized in the offense. I think they're going to want to use him in more power situations on the goal line. So potentially some TD poaching going on here.
Right.
Kamara's too much of a weapon to not be on the field, so the Saints are still going to put him out there as much as they can. They've been really creative this year, putting what's the quarterback's name? Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Taysom Hill
Right.
on the field and just running like ridiculous plays with him. So I could see some goal line sets with Alvin Kamara lining up as a fullback or even a slot receiver, just so they have all the talent they can on the field. But
Yeah, I mean, even in between the 20s, you can easily line up Kamara as a wide receiver and get plenty of production from him. I think, honestly, he's probably the second best pass catcher on the team anyway.
Right. So Kamara is going to likely take a hit in just touchdowns and production, but we'll see a lot of that this week with the return of Mark Ingram. Otherwise, Drew Brees is playing MVP type football this season through 4 weeks. So if he's on your team, you're absolutely starting him, no questions asked. Players I'm watching out for, Washington does have a good defense, and they've held down the likes of Andrew Luck and Aaron Rodgers. So if the Saints do have an off week offensively, don't be shocked if this is it, because the Redskins defense can get after the quarterback. They have Josh Norman.
Off of a bye too, yeah.
They have a bye. They had time to prepare for this. So I still expect the Saints, with one of the best offenses in the league, and them getting this added dimension of the running game with Ingram coming back, I think they're going to take care of business at home. So if you have any Saints, make sure they're starting. Michael Thomas is not someone I mentioned, but I still think he'll take care of business when it comes to facing Josh Norman. He's a type of player that's not going to want to have 2 bad weeks in a row.
Right.
And he came off that 4-49 performance against Janoris Jenkins.
And it's in New Orleans. You play your Saints.
Yeah, absolutely. No questions.
Let's go to these games, the last of these NFC games here. We got the Cardinals going to the 49ers. Hopefully David Johnson can get right here.
There were some signs last week. He
Yeah.
started to look like he was getting involved. Josh Rosen was moving the ball to him.
Yeah. And, with the 49ers giving up the 10th most fantasy points to running backs, I think another week with Josh Rosen at quarterback, make that offense kind of settle down a little bit, and I think they know that they need to get David Johnson the ball, so hopefully they can keep doing that. Another guy on the Cardinals that I'm looking out for, Ricky Seals-Jones. The 49ers are giving up the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends, so Ricky Seals-Jones could be one of those cheaper DFS tight ends for you. One of the more interesting aspects of this game is Patrick Peterson maybe going up against Marquise Goodwin. I think in the past, definitely in the past, Patrick Peterson has always been a shadow cornerback, where he sticks to one guy. But their new head coach there had said before the season started that he did not want to do that with Pat Pete this year. He wanted to keep him on one side, and haven't watched enough of these Cardinals games to really dissect whether or not that's true or whether or not he has been kind of plastering to a certain receiver. But Paul, I know you had some.
Yeah, Marquise Goodwin he's only faced the Cardinals twice in his career so far, but it hasn't been great numbers. He's been targeted 10 times, only has pulled in 3 receptions off of that. Mm-hmm. He's had 86 yards against them in his career, so he's averaging 43 yards a game, but I am just going to speculate here that one of those catches was a deep ball, that there was a miscommunication in coverage, and that's how he ended up open for that many yards.
Right.
So I would say that the Cardinals secondary is pretty clued into what it takes to shut down Marquise Goodwin. So if he's a fantasy option for you, I think you best look elsewhere this week when it comes to receiving help in this game.
Yeah, and then you look at the 49ers running back situation. The Cardinals are giving up the most fantasy points to running backs this season. I know Breida's banged up. Obviously, Alfred Morris is there as well. So I think maybe Alfred Morris could be a nice play in DFS, or if you have him on your bench, if Breida is out come game time, with what the Cardinals are doing and giving up fantasy points to the running back. But it's the tight end situation in the 49ers that's the most interesting to me. George Kittle leads the 49ers in targets, receptions, and yards, and he's got more yards than the next 2 49ers combined. So it's, yes, Marquise Goodwin missed the first couple games of the season. I'm sure if he had played these numbers wouldn't look the same. But Kittle is obviously somebody that is very much involved in that offense there. So if you have him, definitely play him. It seems like C.J. Beathard really likes him. He's definitely a good play.
How's this for a stat? C.J. Beathard last week threw for 298 yards. That is more than Jimmy G has thrown for all this season with the 49ers. So, I'm not saying C.J. Beathard's the answer out there in San Francisco, but he obviously got a lot of valuable time last year playing. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think the 49ers need to completely go doom and gloom on their season. They might be able to see what they can do with C.J. Beathard. I know I didn't expect them to put up the amount of points they did against the Chargers last week. So it'll be interesting to see how these 49ers continue to play, if they can really rally behind this backup quarterback and see what it takes them to.
Let's go to another NFC West showdown. We got the Rams going to the Seahawks. Rams coming off of a Thursday night game, so they're going to have 10 days to prepare. The idea of giving Sean McVay 10 days to prepare for a game is kind of terrifying for me. So I think if you have any of those three any of these three Ram wide receivers, you have to figure out a way to get them in your lineup, whether in one of your wide receivers or a flex spot. I don't really care who your other running back options are, but if you have one of these three guys, you got to at least get them in your flex spot. There's way too much upside for all three of them not to play on your fantasy team. The Marcus Peters versus Tyler Lockett possible matchup is a intriguing one for sure. Obviously with Aqib Talib going down, it's going to be interesting to see if Marcus Peters shadows or if he just stays on one side. How the Seahawks adjust to it with Tyler Lockett, because he is by far and away, I think, their number one receiving option on the team, and the pass game situation or the running game situation is a weird one there. We saw Chris Carson was pronounced out right before game time last week. I'm sure if any of you Chris Carson owners out there are like me, I ran to the waiver wire, picked up Rashad Penny, and was extremely disappointed when I saw all those carries going to Mike Davis. I don't know if he's worth picking up and stashing, as we were talking earlier, the handcuffs, because this Rams defense giving up the 8th fewest points to running backs this season. And I think they still haven't even showed, what they can really do. I think those two defensive tackles haven't really played up to their potential yet. And looking at those two defensive tackles right in the middle of a defense, I don't know how anybody could stick to a run game if in the first quarter or the first half it's not working out for them. So I would stay away from those Seahawks running backs.
I think just all Seahawks.
Yeah, all
Seahawks,
week. Honestly, is probably a good way to go. Even, as we said earlier, in the league that I have Russell Wilson, I got his ass on the bench because I can't trust him anymore.
I'll be interested to see Jared Goff this week. In his career, it's only been 4 games that he's played against the Seahawks, but he only has 2 touchdown passes in those games and has thrown 3 interceptions. So Jared Goff is playing like a man on fire this year. He seems to have really gotten comfortable with Sean McVay. Let's see if he can go really have a statement game and start to own the division that just seems so weak in the NFC West.
Yeah, and this might be one of the first real tests the Seahawks get. They are giving up the 6th fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks, but we'll keep an eye on that and see how far down they fall in the rankings after facing Jared Goff in this Rams.
And losing Earl Thomas. Yeah, we didn't even mention that.
Huge.
The Seattle defense took a big hit there, and it was a pretty ridiculous sight if you saw it happen or just saw the highlight of Earl Thomas unfortunately being carted off the field and then flipping the bird to his fellow Seattle Seahawks on the other side of the field.
Yeah. Or whoever it was supposedly
whoever it was targeted to. But as Cardinals are going up and saying, like, good luck, man, come back healthy, and he's just giving the finger to his old team.
He's like, oh, don't worry, you guys won't see me next year anyway because I ain't going to be on this team.
Yeah, exactly. I was just thinking about how I wanted the Eagles to trade for him, and unfortunately there he goes and gets hurt.
Yeah. I remember seeing a prospected trade of Earl for Le'Veon Bell.
Ooh, that
I
would have
mean,
been interesting.
If I'm the Steelers, I'm still considering that. If I can get rid of Le'Veon Bell, who I'm going to lose for nothing anyway, and be able to start the season next year with a Pro Bowl safety, I'm doing that in a heartbeat. I don't know why.
It's a big risk for both teams.
Exactly.
But it seems like it's one that's worth taking, especially because Earl Thomas just hates Seattle so much right now, and he's trying to get away. Le'Veon, apparently, there's rumors that he's going to come back during the bye week, but I mean, even still, it doesn't seem like Le'Veon is going to be a Steeler next season. So that would be a really interesting trade. And then, I mean, Earl Thomas last year ran up to the Dallas Cowboys coach, Jason Garrett, in the tunnel and said, "Hey, coach, come get me. Come trade for me." So I think Earl Thomas kind of has an idea of where he wants to play some football. But, I mean, if you get traded to the Steelers midseason, I mean, why wouldn't you stay with them next year?
Right. The next game we're going to look at is the Raiders versus the Chargers, an AFC West matchup. Two defenses that are really not playing all that well so far this season. The Chargers are really letting people down. I feel like they were one of those defenses that were maybe drafted as a top 5, top 6 defense, and they are not playing like it at all. They're giving up the 10th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers. It can't all just be the fact that Joey Bosa hasn't played yet, but we will see when he returns. Maybe that defense turns it around.
Week 8, I think they're saying, for Joey Bosa coming back.
Yeah. The Raiders running backs on the other side of the ball, they're giving up the 7th most fantasy points to running backs. So if you needed any more of a reason to start to Melvin Gordon, there you go. You're going to start the Chargers wide receivers no matter what because they're all great, but on top of it, the Raiders are giving up the 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers. So, Keenan Allen looked to have a bounce-back game after a somewhat disappointing game last week. And Mike Williams, another one of these wide receiver twos that is really, pushing up as a big-time player for them. The matchup I'm most interested in here is the prospect of possibly seeing Casey Hayward shadowing Amari Cooper. They've been playing each other now since Amari got into the league 3 years ago. So he's got, in 6 career games versus the Chargers, he got 6 targets with 75 yards a game, 6 targets a game, I'm sorry. And
36 targets.
36
sorry, you're right.
36 targets total, 6 targets a game in 6 career games. Sorry for all the numbers there, guys, but this is important numbers. And
it means he's worth starting.
Yeah, it means he's a good start this week. So play him. Don't be worried about this Casey Hayward matchup. Yes, he's a great corner, but definitely worth the start. And we're going to finish up with these last 2 games, which I think are going to be 2 of the best games of the week. We got 2 absolutely horrible defenses in Pittsburgh. We got the Atlanta Falcons visiting the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Falcons giving up. They're in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers.
And it seems like their secondary loses another starter each week.
Another good starter each week, too. I don't know how they can keep this going, but
it really is unfortunate for the Falcons. I know they started the year with high hopes with the Super Bowl being there this year, and it has just unfortunately not worked out that way with injuries and just other issues the offense has run into.
And then you look at the Steelers' defense, top 10 in fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends. So basically, if you have any players on either of these teams, you start them. The only one I would maybe be worried about is Tevin Coleman. Last week was the first time in Coleman's career where Devontae Freeman was inactive that he didn't have double-digit fantasy points. And the Steelers are actually giving up the 7th fewest points to running backs. I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that you can basically do anything you want to that defense in the pass game. But, numbers are numbers. So if you want to play them, go ahead. Maybe it's probably the worst matchup of the game. But like I said, it's probably going to be the shootout of the week. So if you have any of these players, start them.
In 16 total meetings between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Atlanta Falcons, and 16 is not a lot because they're in 2 different divisions. So this is spread out over a long period of time. Steelers have only lost twice to the Atlanta Falcons. The last time was in 2006. Okay. So for those Steelers fans out there looking for the team to really wake up and get right, you might get back on the right track this week at home against an Atlanta team that you're just going to be challenged to score points against. And I think given what Big Ben and the receiving core for the Steelers have done this year is, I think, a manageable task for them to score points.
Right. And that brings us to the last game of the week, which I think we would both agree is going to be one of the best games of the week. It's by far the best defense in the league against one of the top 2 or 3 offenses in the league. Jacksonville Jaguars going out to play in Kansas City versus the Chiefs. Jacksonville Jaguars are giving up the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks and wide receivers, again, like last year. They're giving up the 5th fewest fantasy points to running backs and tight ends. So this is just a hellacious defense. They beat you up at the line of scrimmage. The linebackers can cover your tight ends or any of your running backs. The cornerbacks shut your receivers down. They're just gnarly. And you look at this Chiefs offense, probably the most exciting offense in the league by far, I think. Patrick Mahomes really showed us a lot last week. He
is the truth.
Yeah, he actually showed if you pressure him, which is I think the only thing defense coordinators were saying. Okay, all we got to do is just pressure the guy, right? He's a young player. He's gonna run around and throw interceptions. And has he thrown a pick this season yet? I don't.
I'll look it up.
I don't know if he has, man. And that was like coming into the season, everyone's like the gunslinger mentality. He's gonna throw a bunch of picks and.
I mean, I know he threw last week. People were talking about all the comparisons to Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers in terms of escapability and just making things happen with the play. It was the stat that I heard all week that he threw for the most yards outside of the pocket in a long time with 192 yards outside of the pocket. So either on the run throwing with his left hand as
we
Von
saw.
Miller's tackling him.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah, he's a walking highlight reel that has a ton of weapons around him, has a coach that loves to throw the ball in Andy Reid and loves to show off young, weaponized quarterbacks like Patrick Mahomes has turned out to be.
Yeah, I mean, he had the rushing touchdown, he had the passing touchdown, 300 passing yards. And it was very encouraging for the Hareem Kunt fans out there who have him on their team. He had finally got 19 carries, turned him into 120 yards with a touchdown, caught 3 passes for another 54 yards. But the thing that I noticed watching this Monday Night Football game was the fact that Hunt was never on the field on these 3rd and longs. There was a 3rd and 10, a 3rd and 20, a 3rd and 9, 3rd and 15, and a 3rd and 5 where he was not on the field. So I don't know if that tells me that they don't trust him in pass protection. I don't know if it says that with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, they're not targeting the running back on 3rd downs or as an outlet pass catcher. But definitely something to worry. I don't know about worry about, but definitely something to keep in mind in PPR leagues at least with Kareem Hunt is just the severe downtick in production in the pass game from last year to this year. We saw Tyreek Hill have another good game. Yeah, he didn't have a touchdown, but caught 9 passes for 54 yards. In a PPR league, that's a great stat line. And then with Watkins going out with another guy with a hamstring injury, we saw Chris Conley, 6 targets, caught 4 of them for 13 yards. I don't know about anybody else, but I was playing against Travis Kelce in Monday Night Football. I had a 15-point lead, and after the first half, I thought I was sitting pretty, and just shows how quickly the Chiefs can turn things around. They threw Kelce that little shovel pass thing. And
Andy Reid loves his shovel passes.
Yeah, that shovel pass is definitely a trademark in that offense. Kelce had those 12 targets. He only caught 7 of them. Like I said, the first half was really tough for him, but finished the game with a really nice stat line, 78 yards and a touchdown. So with Watkins being out, if he's out again with this hamstring injury, Conley is definitely going to see more targets. He's going to be more involved. It's definitely not the week to start him in weekly fantasy or in season long. I'm sorry, but in DFS maybe he's one of those super cheap contrarian plays that maybe can get behind the defense and score a touchdown. But
Patrick Mahomes has not thrown an interception this week. What do you think? His first interception? He hasn't thrown an interception this year. He has 14 total touchdown passes.
I think this might be the week,
This
man.
is the week.
I think this is the week.
And it's probably not even one that's his fault. It probably bounces off Travis Kelce's hands and gets scooped up by anyone floating around.
Or one of those massive defensive linemen that Jacksonville has gets a paw up in the air, bats it down, whatever. I think one of the most underrated aspects of this Jaguars team is the fact that they can not only shut down your receivers, but they can shut down tight ends too, and they showed that against Gronk and the Patriots a couple weeks ago. So I think Kelce, out of all these guys, I mean, if you have Tyreek Hill, he's such an explosive player, such a huge upside. I don't think you can ever sit him, even if he was playing against the 85 Bears or if Dion wanted to suit it back up and go out there and play. But Kelce, I think, is the one player on this Kansas City Chiefs team that you can get away from. We've talked about it throughout the whole podcast. The tight end position is just so hard. I think, you can take a flyer on one of these guys that, hopefully can get you a touchdown. But
it'll be interesting, too, because Jalen Ramsey is definitely one of those cornerbacks that moves around. Mm-hmm. You saw it with all the trash that he's been talking on Gronk from last season's AFC Championship game to this year when they matched up. He's someone that the Jags will likely keep on the same side, but they're still going to put him on the best target of that side. So whether it's him lining up on Travis Kelce to shut him down because they think with the injury to Sammy Watkins and just what they can do to blanket a Ty Hill, they can keep them in check. I think Mahomes is going to add a huge next level to this game with what he can do on the ground with his feet running around. So it's going to be a big test for both teams. Yeah. High-powered offense, really tough defense. It's going to be an exciting game to watch.
Yeah, I can't wait for it, man. So that does it for the Week 5 preview of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you guys like this new setup with the two different segments. We're going to be looking to add some more fun little things to do in the first segment to keep this podcast lively and whatnot. So definitely keep yourself tuned in, keep downloading, suggest to some of your friends in your fantasy leagues, or just keep all this delicious information that you're getting from us to yourself. Whatever you want to do, it's all good. Just keep tuning in, and may the fantasy gods be brutal to your opponent this week. Good luck, and let's go Jets.
Go Birds.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. To listen to our episodes or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app, available on Android and iDevices, or visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find all of our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors, podcasts, and other content, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app. Thanks for listening, everybody. And until next time, drink responsibly.